They would like to destroy higher education because they feel that universities are bastions of progressive left-wing thought.
The Harvard president and the Harvard University actually reached out proactively to the DOJ anti-Semitism task force to say, hey, what do you want us to do? Should we shut down the Middle East Studies Department? Should we fire X or Y professor?
Chuck Schumer going along with Trump's budget, and it's just unfathomable.
Even I didn't think they would go to kind of this level of fascism so quickly. We're not even 100 days in, and they're literally disappearing people off the streets, green card holders.
Talk about McCarthyism, which we were in a moment ago. I mean, that was Hollywood.
Because he's literally now presiding over the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank.
There are just so many things about Andrew Cuomo. I mean, the nursing home deaths.
Yes.
The
COVID
cover-up
deaths, yeah.
of the nursing home deaths during COVID.
This is a big blue city, liberal city, the city that Republicans hate. And yet you keep electing these kind of right-wing blowhards.
Well, we haven't elected him yet.
I'm Mehdi Hassan.
I'm Cynthia Nixon.
And we're not kidding. It's a Zeteo podcast where funny people talk about serious things, but I hope also funny things. How are you, Cynthia?
I'm pretty well.
How are you? Such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It's a pleasure too. I mean, I feel like every time nowadays someone says, how are you? You don't know how to answer, right?
That's
so
true.
I've just taken to saying, personally, I'm pretty well.
Personally, you're pretty
Personally,
well.
I'm pretty
Just
well.
Not outside of your person.
Yes, exactly.
Not in the country at large.
Exactly.
It's great to have you here. The last episode of this show we did, the co-host was Bassem Youssef, who is a very funny comedian, and he made fun of me, saying that I'm not a funny person, that I'm a very serious person, which I am, especially in these times. But now I'm lucky to be joined by a cast member of one of the most famous comedy dramas of all time.
Oh dear,
Look
this
at
is
that.
a lot to live up to.
Yeah, a lot to
funny,
live up to for
funny,
you.
me all the time.
And we're
Funny,
here in
funny.
New York. And we're here in New York, which is always fun to be in New York. I love visiting this city. You are very New York, right? Just to remind myself, I went back and I Wikipedia'd you, even though I know all about you. And you've been a Zeteo contributor for the last year. We love you for that. But I went back and I was like, Cynthia's very New York. Born and raised in New York.
Yes.
Went to school, Barnard in New York.
Yes.
Theater in New York.
Never went anywhere else.
Did one of the most famous TV shows about New York.
About New York.
Sex and the City.
Exactly.
And then ran for governor of New York.
Yes.
So what is left for you to be the literal Statue of Liberty? Like, what New York height do you need to reach next to really show your affinity for this great city?
You know, I'm, as you said, I'm just a New Yorker through and through, and I've literally never lived anywhere else. And when
Never want to live anywhere else?
Never really wanted to live anywhere else. And when, I was a child actor, so when I started, I was like 11, 12, started acting, and people were always trying to get me to go to Los Angeles, and I wouldn't be budged.
Yeah, New York's better than LA. But when I'm in LA, I'll say LA is better than New York. That's a key rule. To praise the city you're in. And you ran for governor. Do you want to talk about, we're going to talk about Mr. Cuomo later in the show.
Oh, yes.
You ran against him in 2018. There's a long history of actors, celebrities running for elected office. Ronald Reagan ran for governor.
Yes, of course. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnie was governor. Jesse Ventura, Jesse the Body Ventura.
Well, yes.
A dictator, not quite an actor, although he was very good in Predator.
There are all those rumors about The Rock, right?
Yeah, The Rock
we were
wanting to run
hearing
straight
for a
for
while.
president.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying, I just want to fact check this, are you the only cast member of Sex and the City who's run for elected office?
I think so, yes.
Do you think any of the others consider it?
No.
You can't see SJP or Kim as education secretary like Linda McMahon.
We did, sad to say, we did have Trump on an early episode, but
One
as
of
a
the many
very brief,
appearances.
I wouldn't even say guest star, as a cameo. So
I often describe him as the President of the United States and former star of Home Alone 2. That's how I often remember Donald Trump in the ridiculous era we live in. Something else New York has become identified with in recent months, especially since October 7th and especially since Donald Trump's return to power, is protest, student protest, campus protest. At the heart of a lot of this debate has been Columbia University, Barnard College, that you are an alum of, which is affiliated with Columbia, NYU, which recently cancelled a talk by the former head of Doctors Without Borders because they said her Gaza slides were anti-Semitic or could be considered anti-Semitic.
I know.
And her slides about Doge could be considered anti-governmental, as if that's a thing in the United States of America. When you see what's happening at Barnard, at Columbia, like this is world historic stuff. The entire world is watching. What do you make of that as someone who went to that college?
Personally, it's devastating. It's obviously even more devastating for the students who are there now, for the faculty who are there now. But I think it's also I think it's foolish. I think it's a terrible mistake. Never mind free speech, but even just for the institution itself. I mean, I think, Timothy Snyder's wonderful book on tyranny, this is the first thing he says: do not obey in advance.
He's just moved to Canada.
Well, who can blame him, really?
No, I can't blame him. I'm not saying it in a critical way, but
if you look at Columbia, Barnard, I've been involved in protests recently against NYU Langone for stopping medical care to trans youth, because they anticipate that this is what Donald would please Donald Trump. And I was at a protest on Monday, and somebody was saying, they're going to start with trans youth, and then it's going to be trans people in general, and then it's going to be we're not allowed to serve undocumented people, and then abortion is going to take off the table.
Slopes. Same thing with the protests with the students. To start with the student visas, green cards. Next, it's naturalized citizens. Hello, and so on.
The most disheartening thing, never mind standing up for what's right, but it's not going to get you anywhere. It's like, it's not like, well, they just want to deport these few people, or they just would like the protests to stop, and then everything will be great. It's like,
don't be so naive.
Don't be so
naive.
Also,
did none of these college presidents, did they never go to elementary school, middle school? Did they never have to deal with a bully at lunchtime? Like, you don't pay off the bully. It doesn't work. He just comes back for you and your friends.
He just comes back for more.
And goes after your friends next.
These are the people I can roll over right away.
But Columbia's rolled over. NYU is rolled over. Harvard has rolled over. And in fact, actually, I've got a great, you tweeted, you said this institution about Columbia, you said this institution has caved to fascism and is throwing their students, the faculty, and the Constitution to the wolves. Shame on Columbia. And I agree with that. But it's actually worse, right? Because they're not just caving. They want to do this stuff. A lot of this stuff is stuff they kind of wanted to do anyways, and they're using Trump as an excuse.
Well, and the way that the police have been invited into both campuses to literally beat students.
Including Jewish students, by the way, who this is supposed to be all about. Protecting Jewish students.
Right.
But many of them are arrested, detained, assaulted.
Right. And that anti-Semitism is being used as the passkey through which all of this, police presence and lack of free speech. I mean, now, the Columbia campus runs from 114th to 120th. And it was always true that people in the neighborhood could walk right through. I mean, that was a condition of, right? And the gates there were ornamental, and now the gates are locked. So if you're a person who lives in the neighborhood, an elderly person, I mean, you've got to walk. It's crazy, out of the way. I mean, it's become this fortress.
So you're wrecking the college and the city life.
Yeah, I mean, they've always been a terrible, landlord, neighbor, whatever you want to say, to the people to the north of them in Harlem. But now they're just a terrible neighbor to everyone in the immediate vicinity.
I mean, you look at Harvard, for example. There is reporting that the Harvard president and the Harvard University actually reached out proactively to the DOJ anti-Semitism task force to say, hey, what do you want us to do? Should we shut down the Middle East Studies Department? Should we fire X or Y professor? And then people get mad when you talk about the 1920s or 1930s. Like, this is how fascism
Or
grows.
the 1950s or the
McCarthyite era, which is people, as you say, obeying in advance, jumping on the bandwagon, trying to appease bullies, trying to get favorable terms. And it doesn't work. Even now, the UPenn funding, the Columbia funding, not that they got anything back from Trump.
And the fact of the matter is they would like to destroy higher education because they feel that universities are bastions of liberal, progressive, left-wing thought.
Yeah.
And so they have decided that we're evil. So they're just shooting
the
fish in a barrel.
And they have the playbook.
Right now.
Viktor Orban in Hungary went after the universities. Every authoritarian leader goes after higher education, and George Soros and the rest. The single worst thing I think that has happened domestically, and it's a long list to pick from. We're meeting the day after tariffs, crashing the economy perhaps. But for me, still, the most egregious thing in my view since he came back to office is the disappearing Pinochet style of people off the streets. Mahmoud Khalil, Columbia grad student, green card holder, married to an American citizen. Rumeysa, the Turkish student at Tufts. Horrific video.
The footage of
the
her
footage.
being
I've watched
taken,
it several times, and every time
I know,
it's horrifying.
You can't believe
They
it.
come up in masks, man. They don't provide any ID. They just
She
grab
says,
her
I'm calling the police. They're like, we are the police.
It's weird because Republicans believe in stand your ground, right? They've passed stand your ground state. How did they know she wouldn't have pulled out a gun and shot them as I felt threatened? Like, I know it's Massachusetts, not Florida, but it's insane that a masked man can come and grab you by the wrists with no ID and you're supposed to go along with them in America, of all places.
And
don't tread on me.
And deporting people who are supposed to be gang members to countries they're not even originally from.
With no shred of evidence that they're gang members.
No.
In fact, the guy they picked up in Maryland that the Atlantic broke the story of, who's the husband of American citizen, Mr. Garcia, has a 5-year-old child with disabilities, hearing condition, autism. He was wearing Chicago Bulls merch in a Home Depot parking lot in 2019, and a detective from Maryland who was later suspended said he's a gang member. And that's it. That's all they have. He's never been charged or convicted with a crime, and they've disappeared him. And even me, someone who was warning about the dangers of Trump all of 2024, even I didn't think they would go to kind of this level of fascism so quickly. We're not even 100 days in, and they're literally disappearing people off the streets. Green card holders.
It's unbelievable, and the amount of just firing of whole, like, let's get rid of the Department of Education. But I do think it's really important. One thing that makes my wife crazy is when the media, I won't name specific, but when the media says, today, Trump abolished the, Department of Education. It's like, well, he didn't.
He doesn't have the power.
He doesn't have the power. And so in the same way we should not be preemptively subservient, we should not give him these victories that he is claiming. It's like today he attempted to abolish the Department of Education by
They did the same thing with
things.
birthright citizenship. His executive order to end birthright citizenship. Well, you can't end it via executive order. That's the whole point. It's in the 14th Amendment, right? A Reagan judge said it was blatantly unconstitutional. You're right. We kind of give him power that he doesn't have and embolden him further to act in this kind of lawless, tyrannical way. And I do worry. I mean, Marco Rubio is bragging that he's signed 300, visa removals.
Yes.
We're going to see a lot more of kind of masked people with no ID and unidentified cars picking people up. And I don't know at what point, quote unquote, mainstream media is willing to say the F word, is willing to say we're living through a period of fascism right now.
It's the people who are being seized and, that they are trying to deport seem so incredibly random.
Yeah.
And it just also feels like specific ICE agents who are like eager beavers and trying to really
They've been unleashed.
Grab somebody near them and think that the president will be so happy with them. I mean, it's just complete chaos.
John Harwood, Zeteo contributor, wrote a very good piece last week about Tom Homan, the border czar, the ex-ICE head who Trump has now emboldened, that he is the face of Trump's cruelty. Like, he loves this stuff. He takes pleasure in doing this stuff. And I think back in the Trump first time, you described ICE as a terrorist organization. Mm-hmm. And that was a time when some activists were talking about abolish ICE, hashtag abolish ICE. Mm-hmm. That was then blamed with defund the police as extremist mantras from activists that cost Democrats the election, whatever it was, excuses were made. I would like to see more Democrats talk about abolishing ICE. ICE is not in the Constitution. It's barely 20, 30 years old as an agency. It's completely lawless. I don't see how a future Democratic president can ever trust it ever again.
And it's it is a government agency, and it is effectively a terrorist agency. It is an agency
in terms of inflicting terror for
of
political
terror.
purposes.
They're inflicting terror on people without regard to law.
And I don't understand how there's this thing about, we can reform the police, don't abolish the police. With
I
ICE,
know, aren't you supposed to be the party of law and order?
I don't see how a future Democratic president, if we get one, can ever trust anybody in this agency, given what we've seen them do on camera. Just talk about Democrats for a few moments here. We're in New York, where the two party leaders are elected figures. Chuck Schumer, leader of the Democrats in the Senate, Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the Democrats in the House. How do you think they have handled this moment, especially when it comes to detentions, students, freedoms, free speech?
Terribly. I mean, Chuck Schumer did, I think, a little bit better than Hakeem Jeffries. But, Chuck Schumer going along with Trump's budget, and I agree. I mean, it's just unfathomable, particularly when, his colleagues in Congress were trying so hard to stand up, and he just abandoned them. I mean, it's
not leadership.
No, it's not leadership.
Also, the Mahmoud Khalil staff, the problem for Jeffries and Schumer is they are so pro-Israel as politicians that as much as I'm sure they want to speak out for the
But
First
even-
Amendment,
yes.
they're not going to. Someone like
But
Mehmet
even
Khalil.
Chuck Schumer has tried at times
It was
to
a very
say,
weak statement on Khalil, right? It was like, well, if I don't agree with him, it wasn't as resounding. Dick Durbin, who I'm not a fan of, he actually came out and said, "Free Mahmoud Khalil," like very
Yes.
basic
yes,
mantra.
yes.
Schumer, Jeffries, you wonder how much of their own pro-Israel biases are preventing them from really standing up for these students who they disagree with, obviously, on Israel.
But I mean, I think this is a problem of the Democratic Party in general,
Yeah.
right? Whether you're talking about Israel or whether you're just talking about income inequality, wealth inequality, is like supposedly the Democrats are the party of the little guy and fighting against injustice. But if you have these donors who are whatever they are, like so solidly pro-Israel or so solidly oil and gas
Yep.
or so solidly anything that ostensibly we're trying to get justice and clarity on, don't talk about the Green New Deal because we really got to, not upset those donors. It's a reason I think that Kamala Harris was so, hang-tied. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? She could not, whether you're talking about Gaza or whether you're talking about, the environment, anything,
Yes.
because you gotta please those guys
Yes.
who are keeping the lights on.
I do want to talk about Kamala Harris and Gaza briefly, but just on this, on the Democrats and the donors, you have Bernie Sanders and AOC going on an anti-oligarchy tour, reminding people that they're not beholden to donors.
And
Huge
tens of
crowds.
thousands of
Yeah.
people.
Apparently, there's a demand for it. Shock horror.
Right.
Surprisingly, Americans want someone who's going to stand up and fight. And Cory Booker's speech in the Congress enliven. He's doing something.
It's
right?
it's like Occupy Wall Street. It's like we're not exactly sure what the plan is, but
Do something.
people flock to it because somebody is standing up and saying this is not okay.
As
So-
opposed to Chuck Schumer, who famously turned up outside, I think the Department of Education or USAID with this kind of, remember there was Al Green with this cane. It was a real gerontocracy. Going, we will fight. And then there was, did he say that we're all aroused? I think there was some line he said shortly after the inauguration. There is a call now from people that AOC should primary Chuck Schumer.
Fantastic.
Would you be lining up to endorse AOC
fantastic.
for
I would be
Senate?
lining up, yes.
Some people say she should run for president. Some people say Senate.
I think presidents, I would certainly campaign for her. I think it's probably a little too soon.
She's young.
Yeah, she's young, but
Senator and then president.
yeah, why not?
All right. Congressman Ocasio-Cortez's office, there's a future small dollar donor. On Kamala Harris, I'm glad you raised the Harris issue because she's kind of disappeared. By the way, is it weird that Obama, Harris, Biden, they're kind of AWOL right now at a moment where shouldn't they be saying something? Like we're in this major moment right now. Or do you think it's best they don't say anything?
I mean, I was at Othello the other night. Joe Biden was right there in the audience.
Was
So
he awake or asleep?
he seemed awake.
Okay.
Norms have certainly gone out the window, but I mean, there is this longstanding tradition that you don't speak out against a brand new administration, and this is still a pretty brand new administration.
Yeah, I think that norm is long gone.
Yeah.
When Biden was in office, of course, famously, Trump didn't even show up to the inauguration. On Gaza, do you believe that Gaza cost Kamala Harris or helped play a role in costing Kamala Harris the White House?
I absolutely think it did. And, when you would look at the polls about people, of course, there were the Trump people and there were the Harris people, but you would look at that pool of people who were still undecided, and they would, overwhelmingly say that if she spoke out more on Gaza, that would not hurt them. And
Yes.
And it had almost no ability to hurt her, and it did actually have an ability to move the needle. So I think
Especially in swing states. Those polls were in swing states. Where they were
and I
safe.
think for people who really care about Gaza, it would have been very important. But I think on a broader level, even if it's an issue that doesn't move you, and I don't understand how that would be, but even if it's an issue that doesn't move you, I think the fact that she would have gone out on a limb and spoken her conscience would have spoken volumes.
Take a stand, as you say. Same thing with the Schumer
Take a
thing.
stand and
Do something.
don't hedge your bets. And we know why you're hedging your bets. It's because your donors don't want you to talk on this. And that is, look, Donald Trump obviously lies all the time.
Yep.
But there is a lot of time where he tells these truths that his handlers would really not want him to tell. And I think that goes a long way with voters.
Well, he did this whole spiel of being the anti-war guy towards the end of the election, where he turned up in Michigan and said, Liz Cheney's a warmonger. I'm the candidate of peace, although now he's threatening to bomb Iran. But yeah, he says the right thing at the right time sometimes.
And sometimes he says a thing that's, famously when he came out against the Iraq War in that first Republican debate,
He made fun of George Bush.
Made fun of George Bush with Jeb Bush right there, the presumptive nominee.
I was watching that and I was on my couch and I cheered out loud. I couldn't believe that a Republican was calling out George W. Bush in that way.
Right, and that there was there is a rawness sometimes to him, which people can smell. They don't seem to smell his lies, but they do smell when he says something that, like, we all know, like, oh, his handlers really don't want him to be saying that, but he says it.
What's frustrating for me when it comes to Trump, though, especially with the left, is it's not just the mainstream media or the New York Times or CNN that gives Trump a pass. I feel like elements of the left, because the left is so good at circular firing squads and infighting.
Yes, totally.
Gives the fascist a bit of a pass. Gaza is a classic example of that. So Donald Trump gets elected. He benefits in some ways from the Democrats being so bad on Gaza. A lot of people in Michigan stay at home or defect to Trump or vote Jill Stein.
I have left-wing Muslim friends that they didn't vote for Trump, but they did not vote for Kamala.
Young people, people of color, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, a bunch of people. And, Joe Biden became, for a period, Genocide Joe. Kamala Harris, people were saying, we can't vote for her. And I understood that. Completely understood the pain and the anger and not wanting to reward Democrats. But then you get Trump, who starts his administration with this fake ceasefire, gets all this great free publicity that Trump got Netanyahu to the table. We all knew phase 2 would never come. That ceasefire is long dead. Over 1,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza since March the 18th, several hundred children. The biggest massacre of children in any single 24-hour period since October the 7th. All aid blockaded into Gaza, even the minimal that was allowed in under Biden. In many ways, it's much worse now under Trump.
Yes.
But does it feel like that when I go on social media or when I meet people or talk about Gaza? I don't know if people are numb to it, people are exhausted by it, but I'm not seeing that. And I wonder how he gets away with this, because he's literally now presiding over the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank. And I'm not seeing the same outrage against him from some, yes, but from others that we saw against Biden. I wonder, is that because we hold the Democrats to a higher standard, or is that he just gets a weird pass? Because right now it's really bad in Gaza. And I don't feel like I'm seeing that in our media, in our activism.
I mean, I think it is a combination of things. One is that you feel like you scream and you scream and you scream and nobody seems to react. And I think another thing is, I think people are scared in a McCarthy kind of a way now.
Yeah.
You just try and find an opening. And I feel like the beating of the Palestinian filmmaker who made No Other Land, the beating by settlers and then the seizure by the IDF. I mean, I think there are people, 900 people in the academy just...
That first statement they put out was absurd.
Unbelievable.
And then they justified it saying, well, we've got diverse perspectives.
I know.
So we have to satisfy.
You've made it worse.
There's a pro-beating faction of the academy.
Right.
There's a
there are good people
faction.
on both sides, I guess.
Exactly.
Right?
It's Charlottesville on steroids in the West Bank.
Right.
Yeah, you wonder, like, did we poll our members? And they said, whoa, don't be mean to the settlers. Yeah, it was a bizarre. The statement was awful. The justification was awful. The follow-up. I'm glad Yuval Abraham, who is the Israeli co-maker of that film, really called out the academy for that. I mean, look, you and I have talked about this before as well, but Hollywood, which is this liberal bastion that stood up to Trump in his first term, that takes, liberal positions on everything from abortion to gay rights to Darfur, go down, George Clooney, go down the list. But there's always that pep. There's progressive except Palestine. There's always that Palestine exception where, the entertainment industry does not come on board in the same way. You obviously have bucked that trend. You and Mark Ruffalo and a handful of others. You signed the Artists for Ceasefire letter shortly after October 7th. You even went on a hunger strike for 2 days in November 2023 to try and draw attention to this. And I remember watching you in December of 2023. You went on The View and you did not mince your words.
Yeah.
Let's watch a clip.
We've seen the deaths of over 16,000 civilians, Palestinians in Gaza, which include over 7,000 children. And to put that in some kind of a context, that is more civilians than were killed by the U.S. and its allies in almost 20 years of war in Afghanistan. As I say every time I speak about this, what Hamas did was
terror,
brutal and terror and unforgivable. But I don't think we get to a better place with more civilian deaths. And that is why, in my belief, we need a permanent ceasefire right now.
When you went on The View, what were you thinking at that time about, I don't want to single out the people on The View, but in general, Hollywood, entertainment? You're taking this position that's very unpopular at the time. This is just a couple of months after October the 7th. A lot of people in your industry want to say what you're saying, but they're worried about professional consequences. What are you thinking in that moment?
I'm thinking that, I have Jewish children, and my Jewish child, my oldest one in particular, is the person who is telling me, you can't not speak. You can't. He said, I'm doing everything I can in my smaller way. You have a big megaphone. Please do whatever you can. And I think it's really important to not let anyone confuse your words, not to let anyone think that this is in some way a defense of Hamas, and just make sure that there's no possibility that they don't think that you don't think that what happened on October 7th was horrific and unacceptable and devastating. But I think that it's really important to just keep saying women and children and elderly people are being not only just bombed and shot in unimaginable numbers, but like you say, they're also being starved, and there's no water, and there's no fuel, and there's no medical care. There is nothing. And so if we just, what I tried to do on The View was just keep bringing it back to that, not who's right, who's wrong, who started it, what's the solution. It's like, we can't keep killing children and women and babies.
Fatima Bhutto, who is a Zeteo contributor, a Pakistani novelist, she's been very critical in her pieces for us of what she claims is the hypocrisy. She argues is the hypocrisy and silence of white liberal feminists in the West who will stand up for women in Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan, but Palestinian women who are having to have C-sections without painkillers, no access to kind of sanitary products, having to use bits of tent. Where is the feminist movement when it comes to Palestinian women?
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a human issue, but certainly if you care about women and you care about children, these are not combatants. There is. I mean, how long are we going to hear? Well, we had to kill them. They were being used as shields. It's what does Bill Burr say? Something about like, if a guy, comes up with a baby in front of him, you don't shoot the baby. Like, you don't.
Yeah.
You have to find another way.
Unless you've dehumanized that baby
Unless
to the
you've
point
dehumanized
where you
baby
don't
to the
consider
point
it's
where
not human, it
every
doesn't matter
single
the life.
Palestinian is a terrorist.
Or their lives just don't matter when they die. Like, it's the equivalent of killing
But they're
insects
all
or ants.
somehow complicit,
Yes.
right?
And we've seen that on Israeli television. They've talked about even children being complicit in terrorism. The rhetoric is bad. Just one last question on this. To go back to Hollywood, you mentioned earlier about politicians having to worry about donors. Hollywood actors don't have to worry about donors, especially the kind of A-listers who make a lot of money, but they do have to worry about their movies.
Yes.
And
they have
who's
to worry
funding
about
the
the
movies.
audiences. They have to worry about, you said that Hollywood is very left-wing, but except for Palestine.
Liberal.
Right, liberal
It's not
Hollywood.
left on the economy.
Most of Hollywood is liberal, I would
Yeah.
say. But again, if you talk about McCarthyism, which we were in a moment ago, I mean, that was Hollywood, right? That's where he, the army, okay, and the government workers, but McCarthy made the most inroads in Hollywood, which is like, we can be very liberal, we can be very progressive, but we can also be very easily scared.
And become an adjunct of the state.
And because we don't want the government to come after the studios, the studio bosses don't want, and people on, now that there are all these different streaming services and their subscription. But, when I started out back in the day, there was only network television, and it was constantly like, don't do that. The sponsor won't like it. So we're very liberal, but we're very
still worried about
we're very
pays the bills.
scared, very scared.
Have you been following the row over Rachel Zegler and Gal
I
Gadot
have.
and Snow White?
I have.
She was told to delete tweets saying, standing up for Palestinian rights, whereas Gal Gadot is able to talk about
Yeah.
October 7th, the Israeli military, Israel, her love for Israel, which is each to their own, that's her free speech. But to do the same for Palestine makes Rachel some kind of extremist, woke activist, troublemaker.
Right. And she's playing Snow White. She's well cast. Snow White is going to be concerned and care about Palestine. Let's just say.
Okay. We got to talk about New York and New York politics.
Yes.
Andrew Cuomo,
He's back.
who you know well,
I do.
who you ran against,
Yes.
is running for mayor of New York.
Yes, he is.
Meanwhile, the incumbent Democrat has just announced he's no longer a Democrat. He's going to run as an independent. Eric Adams, who just dodged being prosecuted because he did a deal with the Trump administration. He's now holding up a book of Kash Patels to say everyone should read Government Gangsters, a conspiracy theory book about the deep state from a far-right associate of Donald Trump, who's now the FBI director. It's a real shit show in New York right now.
It's crazy.
It's like Adams, Cuomo. Let's just start with Cuomo. He was driven from office as governor because 13 women accused him of some form of sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, etc. He denies it, but various institutional bodies said actually these are valid, credible claims. He's been fighting it with taxpayers' money in court. A lot of Democrats who called for him to stand down are now endorsing him for mayor.
Well, I wouldn't say a lot.
Okay, some, like Gregory Meeks, congressman, has said he called for him to go, now he's endorsed him. There's a bunch. There's a list. What is going on with I know Americans in general have the memories of goldfish, but why do New Yorkers in particular have such willful amnesia?
Well, I will say,
Because Cuomo's leading in the polls, whether we like it or not.
Oh, yes, I know. But I will say we're still 3 months out from the actual primary, which is kind of a lifetime in electoral politics, particularly local electoral politics. And I think at this point, Bill de Blasio, who was elected the first time, I think he was in the single digits at this point, because really, at this point, polls are almost entirely name recognition.
Yes.
And everybody in New York, I promise you, has heard of Andrew Cuomo.
Yes.
And
He's been on the scene for a while. He was governor. Before that, he was AG.
He's the son of a very
Yes, the
long-term
Cuomo name
beloved,
is well known.
Yes.
You ran against him and you have not stopped criticizing him. You put out a video recently where you called out the fact that he has been credibly accused of sexual misconduct. Let's play that.
As he is running for mayor, I think it's really important for us to remember what he did. 13 women accused him of sexual harassment. Those charges were found valid by the New York State Attorney General, the New York State Assembly, and the U.S. Department of Justice. When he was accused by 13 separate women, he sued the state of New York so that taxpayers are footing his legal bills. So far, we have paid out over $25 million in his legal fees, and we are not done yet. Andrew Cuomo had to resign because he was not fit to be governor of New York State. Andrew Cuomo is not fit to be mayor of New York City.
What made you want to come out and take a very strong stance? Are you worried that people are just completely ignoring what is a rather shameful record?
So I really do think that it is important to remember he just didn't decide to leave office or retire. He was driven from office for his illegal activities. And I think it's really important to know and to remember that, the sexual harassment is a morass for people. They don't know, maybe this guy was over-accused or maybe this guy was under-accused. And I think it's really important to know that he is still harassing these women. Lindsay Boylan, who was the first woman brave enough to come forward and say what had happened, what he had done to her, has accrued, I think, $1.5 million in legal bills from his harassment. His legal bills are being paid by New York taxpayers. And I think we're at, depending on how you count it, but like it's $60 million at this point for what New York taxpayers have had to shell out. And he is still, even to the point of subpoenaing women's gynecological records, his accusers. I mean, he's maybe not literally putting hands on people, but he is harassing these women in just as vicious a way as he did then. And there are just so many things about Andrew Cuomo. I mean, certainly like the nursing home deaths,
Yes.
the
COVID
cover-up
deaths, yeah.
of the nursing home deaths during
And that
COVID.
was his, don't forget, that was his strongest
That
calling
was
card at one
supposed to
time.
be his-
Everyone was
right.
like, and I fell for it too. I'll put my hands up. When he was doing those press conferences, we were so fed up with Trump. Even people like me were like, that is leadership. Finally, someone's going out, talking to people, having daily press conferences, reassuring the public. Then later on, we found out the cover-up, the people who died, etc. Again, all just forgotten.
But also, he wrote a book about how great he was during
Yes,
COVID that
he
was
did,
written
yes.
illegally by his staffers who were on the government payroll, at least in part written by them. And, you know, I mean, when I decided to run against him, his administration was rife with corruption. His closest colleagues, a number of whom went to jail for corruption. And also, you know, when I ran, one of our, maybe our signature issue was that Cuomo was using the MTA like an ATM. He hates the subway.
Yeah.
He's never been a fan of the city. He's barely ever been on the subway.
He recently said governor was a better title than mayor. I love that he just opened. He's very Trumpy in that way. He's like, yeah, well, I think I've already been governor. It's like, okay, hold on. So why do you want this job if it's somehow below you? I mean, part of me thinks about you running against him and losing, Maya Wiley running against Eric Adams and losing, looking at the history of Bloomberg and Giuliani, and kind of saying New Yorkers, you get what you deserve.
Well, Maya Wiley.
This is this big blue liberal city,
But I am,
and you keep
but, I,
electing
but, I, but I
freaks.
do want to say, you know, last time when Eric Adams won, it was the first time we had ranked choice voting,
Yep.
and I think all the progressive
Split the
people,
vote.
and there were like scandals that erupted kind of late in the game. I think it was just kind of a mess. I think that the progressive people divided the vote, and
Well, like to have two Trumpy figures in a row. Adams is very Trumpy.
yes,
And then
very
Cuomo,
Trumpy.
who's become even Trumpier now. It's kind of like this is a big blue city, liberal city, the city that Republicans hate. And yet you keep electing these kind of right-wing blowhards.
Well, we haven't elected him yet.
That's true. Good comeback.
And, you know, you speaking of the hunger strike, I am, of course, a big fan and proponent of Zohran Mamdani.
Yes.
Who I will say, in contrast to Bill de Blasio, who at this point I think was really still in the single digits, Zohran is like exploding.
Yes, he is.
He has reached
We've had him on the show. He sat in that very seat. We've talked to him in this studio.
I mean, he reached his fundraising, you know, cap before anybody else, and I think faster than anyone
I think he
else
said,
running
stop
for
donating
mayor.
to me now.
Yeah, basically, right? And he has.
You've endorsed Zohran.
I haven't literally say I endorse Zohran,
Yeah, but you want him. You want him.
Yes,
as
of
the-
course, he's my guy. And I think he has 12,000 volunteers at this point. And I don't mean like somebody handed out a flyer for a half an hour. I mean 12,000 people consistently out there every week. And he gets 1,000 new volunteers every week.
Wow.
He's trying to knock 1 million doors, and I think he's going to do it.
So it's classic establishment Democrats. Name recognition against the energetic, younger person of color trying to shake
also
things
will
up.
say, you know, just to cite Bill de Blasio again, Bill de Blasio came in with one big progressive idea, which was pre-K for all.
Yep.
And some people were like, you can't do that. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to? People went for it. And Zohran has at least 4 big ideas.
You ran against Cuomo.
Yes.
What advice would you give Zohran Mamdani in running against Cuomo?
I don't think Zohran needs any advice.
Oh,
I gotta say,
such a great
I gotta
answer.
say, I don't think he needs any.
The problem
advice.
is he's up against this huge name recognition, huge machine, a media that's against him.
Yeah, but they say like 4% of people, you know, Zohran has such high likability, and like 4% of people say, I'd like to know more about Cuomo, and like 56% of people say, I'd like to know more about Zohran. And the more people learn about him, the more they like him.
I hope so. The right-wing media obviously has knives out for him, so let's see if he survives that in this city. I saw a New York Post piece the other day saying, he's a Muslim. I was like, I don't think he's hidden that he's a Muslim. I know that's supposed to be ipso facto disqualifying in some circles.
And
but
I'll just say this last thing, which is like, people are excited about Zohran,
Yes.
and they're more and more. He's like on fire, and people are so excited about him, and that's who they want to turn out and vote for. Even the people that know they're voting for Andrew Cuomo, they're not excited about it.
So Zohran and the energy around Zohran and AOC Bernie we talked about earlier, that gives you hope?
And the big ideas. And
because we do need hope, right? Everyone's bleak. You started off the show. How are you feeling personally?
Right. I mean, I feel like people are, again, it's important to know that when Trump says he's going to abolish the Department of Education, he hasn't done it yet. And people are really, there's this, these rallies happening on Saturday. I'm going. People are going all over the country. People are going in D.C. And, we don't have the same sort of 24-hour-a-day outrage, but I think it's much worse this time than it was last time.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we're more strategic. And I think in the past, the first time he was elected, the Women's March, we poured into the streets with our pussy hats and our signs, But now what we really need is information. And I think that's what Bernie and AOC is doing. And I think Cory Booker, even with his, filibuster, he's not just up there reading green eggs and ham, right? He's actually reading testimony of people and how their lives have been at least, if not destroyed, at least greatly harmed since Trump took office. And I think the more we can get the information out and share it and gather, because it's so hard with the media now, because we're such a divided country in terms of, if you're for Trump, you watch, even Fox News maybe is too liberal for you now.
Cynthia, you have filled me with some hope in these dark times, that's for sure. And I say that as someone who's a super negative person. So I'm glad to hear you energetic and enthusiastic. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
It was a pleasure to talk to you too.
We are, by the way, before we finish, I got to say, we're not kidding. Is not even a year old, and we're up for a Webby Award for our interview with Rob Delaney in London last year. So please do go to the link on screen and vote for We're Not Kidding at the Webby Awards, which is coming up fast. Appreciate your support. Like, subscribe, share this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Go over to Zeteo.com, become a subscriber so you can support us, support our contributors like Cynthia, get this show before anyone else. But for now, from me, I'm Mehdi Hassan.
I'm Cynthia Nixon.
And we were not kidding.